There was a time when corner shops held treasures that defined an entire generation. Crisps came in simple flavors, biscuits had proper names, and every packet held the promise of something special. Today, we're diving into the snacks that vanished without ceremony, leaving only memories and empty spaces on supermarket shelves. If you remember even one of these, hit that subscribe button, give us a like, and tell us your favorite in the comments below. Smith's Salt and Shake. Before crisps came ready salted, there was Smith's Salt and Shake, the packet that made you work for your flavor. Inside each blue bag, alongside plain crisps, sat a tiny twist of blue paper containing salt. The ritual was half the pleasure. Rip open the salt, pour it in, shake the bag, and hope for even coverage. It never quite worked perfectly, leaving some crisps desperately over-salted and others bland as cardboard. But that was part of the charm. Launched in the 1960s, Salt and Shake represented a time when convenience foods still required a bit of effort. Children would argue over who got to do the shaking, and adults would reminisce about the satisfying rustle of the bag. By the late 80s, ready-salted varieties had made the ritual obsolete, and Salt and Shake quietly disappeared from shelves. Ringos. Long before Pringles conquered the stackable crisp market, there were Ringos. These ring-shaped potato snacks came in a distinctive cylindrical tube and were flavored with tangy cheese or smoky bacon. Unlike modern stacked crisps, Ringos had an airy, almost corn puff-like texture that dissolved on your tongue. They were the snack of choice for school lunchboxes and Saturday afternoon telly-watching. The rings could be slipped onto fingers before eating, making them as much toy as snack. Golden Wonder launched them in the late 60s, positioning them as the fun alternative to traditional crisps. But as American imports flooded the British market and snacking habits evolved, Ringos lost their grip. They vanished in the early 80s, leaving behind only memories of cheese-dusted fingers and the satisfying crunch that came before the melt. Smith's Chipsticks. Chipsticks were the sophisticated older sibling of ordinary crisps. These slender, stick-shaped snacks came in a slim packet and offered grown-up flavors like salt and vinegar or cheese and onion. They weren't meant to be scoffed by the handful. Instead, you'd eat them one by one, savoring the intense flavor that coated each stick. They were the perfect pub snack, something to nibble whilst nursing a pint or chatting with friends. The texture was unique too, crunchier than a crisp but less substantial than a breadstick. Launched by Smith's in the early 70s, Chipsticks carved out their own niche in the crowded snack market. But perhaps they were too refined for their own good. As bolder, brasher snacks dominated the shelves, Chipsticks seemed almost quaint. They disappeared quietly, mourned only by those who appreciated their understated elegance. Royalty Assorted Biscuits. Every British household of the 60s and 70s had a tin of Royalty Assorted biscuits somewhere in the cupboard. These weren't posh biscuits, but they felt special nonetheless. The rectangular tin contained a mixed selection: jammy dodgers, custard creams, bourbon creams, and digestives all jumbled together. Opening the tin was like a lucky dip. You never knew which biscuit you'd find first. They were the default choice for visitors, the safe option when the vicar called or your neighbor popped round for tea. The tin itself became as iconic as its contents, later serving as storage for sewing supplies or Christmas decorations. But as individually wrapped biscuit brands gained prominence and supermarket-owned brands offered better value, the traditional assorted tin lost its place. Families stopped buying them, and eventually, Royalty quietly vanished from the shelves, taking with it a small piece of British tea-time tradition. Crawford's Cream Crackers. Before Jacobs dominated the cream cracker market, Crawford's held court in British cupboards. Their cream crackers came in a distinctive red and white packet and were slightly thicker than their competitors, with a more substantial crumb. They were the foundation of countless simple meals, topped with cheese for lunch, spread with butter for breakfast, or crushed into soup for texture. Crawford's had been making biscuits since the Victorian era, and their cream crackers carried that heritage in every bite. They weren't fancy, but they were reliable, the kind of product that mothers trusted and grandmothers recommended. But the biscuit wars of the 70s were brutal. Larger companies with bigger marketing budgets squeezed out smaller players, and Crawford's cream crackers became casualties of corporate consolidation. They disappeared gradually, replaced by flashy alternatives that never quite captured the same honest simplicity. Peak Frean's Titbits. Titbits were the miniature marvels of the biscuit world. These tiny, savory biscuits came in several varieties: cheese, bacon, and chicken, all packed into a small cardboard box. They were marketed as cocktail snacks, something sophisticated to serve at grown-up parties, but children loved them just as much. Each biscuit was about the size of a 10-pence piece, perfectly formed and intensely flavored. You couldn't eat just one, they were designed to be consumed by the handful. Peak Frean's positioned them as the elegant alternative to crisps, something you could serve to guests without embarrassment. But perhaps that very positioning was their downfall. As casual snacking became more acceptable and party foods became bolder, Titbits seemed almost dainty. They vanished in the early 80s, victims of changing social habits and the rise of more assertive snack foods. KP Wheat Crunches. Before Quavers and Wotsits ruled the puff snack category, there were Wheat Crunches. These golden, wheat-based snacks had a unique texture, lighter than a crisp but more substantial than a corn puff. They came in simple flavors like bacon or cheese, and the taste was clean and wheaty rather than artificially intense. KP marketed them as the wholesome snack, something that felt almost healthy compared to the fried alternatives. They were popular with mothers who wanted to give their children something that seemed nutritious, and with adults who found regular crisps too greasy. The packet design was simple and honest, reflecting the product inside. But as snack foods became more extreme and marketing more aggressive, Wheat Crunches seemed increasingly old-fashioned. They couldn't compete with the artificial colors and intense flavors of newer products, and quietly disappeared from shelves in the mid-80s. Bird's Eye Potato Waffles. The original Bird's Eye Potato Waffles were nothing like the pale imitations available today. Launched in the early 70s, they had a distinctive golden color and a texture that was crispy outside and fluffy inside. The waffle shape wasn't just for show, those distinctive squares held butter, beans, or whatever topping you chose. They were marketed as the fun alternative to chips, something that would get children excited about tea time. The original recipe used a specific type of potato and a unique cooking process that created an almost soufflé-like interior. But cost-cutting measures in the 80s changed the formula, removing much of what made them special. Whilst potato waffles still exist today, those who remember the original version insist they're shadows of their former selves. The golden, fluffy waffles of the 70s remain a treasured memory for those lucky enough to have tasted them in their prime. Smith's Scampi Fries. Scampi fries occupied a unique position in the pub snack hierarchy. These weren't quite crisps and weren't quite nuts, they were something altogether different. Shaped like tiny prawns and flavored to taste remarkably like scampi, they were the perfect accompaniment to a pint of bitter. The texture was dense and chewy, requiring proper mastication rather than the mindless crunching of ordinary crisps. They came in a small packet, reflecting their premium positioning and intense flavor. Smith's marketed them specifically to pubs, where they became a fixture behind countless bars. But as pub culture changed and lighter, fruitier drinks gained popularity, the demand for heavy, fishy snacks declined. Scampi fries hung on longer than most, but eventually succumbed to changing tastes. They remain legendary among those who appreciated their unique charm and perfect partnership with traditional British ale. Golden Wonder Ringos, Cheese and Onion. The cheese and onion variant of Ringo's deserves special mention because it represented something remarkable in British snacking history. Before the flavor became ubiquitous, cheese and onion was bold, even slightly daring. Golden Wonder's version, applied to their distinctive ring-shaped snacks, created an intensity of flavor that seemed almost exotic. The rings themselves provided the perfect vehicle for the seasoning. Their curved surface held more flavor dust than flat crisps could manage. Children would slip them onto their fingers like edible jewelry before eating them, creating a ritual that was as much about play as sustenance. The flavor was sharper than today's milder versions, with a real bite of onion that lingered on the palate. But as cheese and onion became standard across all crisp varieties, Ringo's lost their special status. They couldn't compete with the marketing might of established crisp brands and disappeared into snacking history. Lion's Individual Fruit Pies. Long before Greggs dominated the individual pie market, Lions made miniature masterpieces in their bakeries. These weren't the mass-produced, uniform products we know today, but proper little pies with real pastry and genuine fruit fillings. Apple, blackcurrant, and cherry were the standard varieties, each one hand-sized and perfect for lunchboxes or afternoon treats. The pastry was substantial and slightly sweet, providing a proper contrast to the tart fruit within. They were sold individually wrapped in greaseproof paper, giving them an artisanal quality that modern equivalents lack. Lions positioned them as wholesome treats, something mothers could give their children without guilt. But as supermarket bakeries expanded and factory-produced alternatives became cheaper, Lion's individual pies couldn't compete. They required skilled bakers and quality ingredients, luxuries that became economically unsustainable. By the early 80s, they had vanished, leaving only memories of proper pastry and real fruit. Peak Frean's Pâté Cake. Pâté cake biscuits were the nursery rhyme made edible. These small, round biscuits were marketed specifically at children, with bright packaging featuring the traditional baker's man. They were sweet but not overwhelmingly so, with a texture that was firm enough to survive lunchbox transportation but tender enough for small teeth. The name itself evoked childhood games and rhymes, creating an emotional connection that went beyond mere taste. Peak Freans understood that selling to children meant appealing to parents' sense of wholesomeness and fun. The biscuits came in a distinctive red packet that stood out on shop shelves, and their size made them perfect for tiny hands. But as children's tastes became more sophisticated and marketing more aggressive, pâté cakes seemed almost innocent. They couldn't compete with character-branded alternatives and chocolate-covered competitors, gradually disappearing from shelves as the 70s ended. McVitie's moment. The McVitie's moment was exactly that, a brief, shining moment in biscuit history. These wafer-thin biscuits were delicate and sophisticated, designed for grown-up palates rather than children's sweet teeth. They came in elegant flavors like almond or lemon, and the texture was crisp and refined. The moment was positioned as the civilized alternative to heartier biscuits, something to serve with coffee rather than builder's tea. The packaging reflected this sophistication, with clean lines and understated colors that suggested quality rather than shouting for attention. But perhaps the moment was too sophisticated for the British market. While continental Europeans appreciated delicate biscuits, British consumers seemed to prefer something more substantial with their tea. The moment never found its audience, disappearing after just a few years on the market. It remains a testament to McVitie's willingness to experiment, even when the experiment didn't quite work. Smith's Tubes. Before Pringles revolutionized stackable snacks, Smith's had their own version, Tubes. These cylindrical containers held differently shaped crisps that were designed to stack neatly inside their cardboard packaging. The concept was sound, fresher crisps, less breakage, more convenient storage, but the execution never quite matched the ambition. The flavors were standard cheese and onion or salt and vinegar, but applied to an unusual curved crisp that felt neither traditional nor particularly innovative. Smith's marketed them heavily, emphasizing the packaging benefits and the novelty of stackable British crisps. But consumers remained skeptical. The tubes were expensive compared to regular packets, and the crisps inside never tasted quite right. When Pringles launched shortly afterwards with superior technology and marketing, tubes looked amateurish by comparison. They disappeared quickly, becoming a footnote in the history of British snacking innovation. Crawford's Morning Coffee Biscuits. Crawford's Morning Coffee Biscuits were designed for a specific moment and purpose. As instant coffee gained popularity in British homes, these thin, crisp biscuits were positioned as the perfect accompaniment. They were less sweet than traditional tea biscuits, with a subtle vanilla flavor that complemented rather than competed with coffee. The texture was important too. They needed to be sturdy enough for dunking but delicate enough to dissolve pleasantly on the tongue. Crawford's understood that coffee drinking was becoming more sophisticated, requiring a more refined biscuit than the robust digestive. The packaging reflected this positioning, with elegant script writing and muted colors that suggested continental sophistication. But British coffee culture developed differently than Crawford's anticipated. Instant coffee remained dominant longer than expected, and when proper coffee culture finally arrived, it came with its own imported accompaniments. Morning coffee biscuits found themselves between two worlds, never quite finding their place in either. These weren't just snacks, they were the tastes that defined decades, the flavors that marked moments in our lives. Each one represented someone's bold idea, someone's attempt to capture lightning in a packet or tin. They failed not because they weren't good enough, but because the world moved on. If any of these brought back a memory or made you smile, subscribe for more forgotten pieces of British life and give us a like. We've got plenty more stories to share.